And MySQL had been looking at going public, and instead ended up getting acquired. 6 months in, how's that seem to you guys?
Let's see, 6 months into this. It's actually been really rewarding. There are, my first reaction with it was, I think the day that we had the announcement, was my first question out was, I think I'd asked one of the Sundays, so you're going to send me a large manufacturing machine to my basement, right? So free hardware, right? 6 months later.
So did it?
No, not yet. I was told that there's a lot of machines you can access somewhere, but I'm still working on getting to the idea of the truck backing up to my house and just dumping off some hardware. It's been really rewarding. Sun has a really old engineering culture. It's a very, very engineering-driven company. And the first time I went to one of Greg's our CTO at Sun, and went to his staff meeting, it was just an amazing meeting with all these engineers who were very disagreeing and commenting on technologies, and it was just a really rewarding environment to be in.
How about you, Monty?
My first reaction was, thank God we didn't go public. because I'm truly believing in open source, and I was a little skeptical about the trend that you need to make more money, and for doing that you need to start doing closed source components. That's already started to influence the decision makers within MySQL, and I just did know that if you go public, that trend will continue, and that's not good for open source.
So effectively, Sun sort of saved MySQL from the pressures of the public market.
Yes.
Or maybe insulated, because I don't think Sun is immune to those pressures either. Just a lot bigger company. So, for MySQL, which is a profitable and growing part of Sun, I think it certainly saves some of that.
And then 6 months in, Sun is still trying to figure out what did they buy.
It's very interesting, because Sun, of course, was arguably the first really successful open source company. They ended up taking Berkeley Unix private, so to speak, and that was the first business model. It was still hardware oriented. They had a great run. In fact, I think they were here at the very first OSCON. I think MySQL was too. So we've had both companies kind of be part of all of this. But Sun has really made it about face, where they started by taking, like Apple, for example, saying what we're going to do is we're going to take the value that was created in open source, and we're going to now create a proprietary company around it. But now Jonathan's made a clear commitment to open source throughout the organization. How's that? Do you see tensions in the organization around that, or is that sort of all the way through?
I think it's inevitable to see tension around that. You have engineers who have worked in traditionally very closed environments who now see their source code having to go out and be public. And for any engineer, that's kind of there's a certain moment of truth in that. That is, did we write this thing well? Did we miss something? What does this mean? I don't know if I have to get on mailing lists, or I hear there's something called IRC that I now have to add that to my daily list of already too much information that's coming in. So I think from an engineering standpoint, as an engineer who wants to move themselves into open source, or wishes to work on open source, it is opening yourself up to an awful lot more input than what you may traditionally have. So, what I see when I talk to people in Sun, some people are very much like, we want to get our stuff out there very fast, get people using it as quickly, and then there's other people who are, less wanting to actually have any kind of spotlight on their work.
We'll drink no wine before it's time. Yeah. So you guys are acting as kind of a sort of a retraining force within Sun in some.
Protagonist is my favorite word, but yeah.
How do you guys mentor engineering at MySQL and Sun? I mean, is there any formal process where you're teaching open source, or is it just by who you are?
Actually, we are teaching Sun in two things. First, how does a virtual organization of developers really work? And that Sun is really interested to do that, because they're trying to do things more virtual, and understanding how to get things, create something where developers will strive and want to be, even when they are not in contact with any human beings. Mm-hmm. And that has started to work out really good.
Yeah, right. So MySQL was fairly unique as a company in being really, really virtual. You had a lot of people all over the world who work from their homes, like Brian.
Yeah.
And of course, you'll know that you've won when they all get big Sun machines, right? Or will you have won when they don't need big Sun machines because they're all in the cloud?
Well, I think that's actually the key there is that the long term, I don't think anybody needs anything more than probably a laptop and an internet connection at this point to do software development.
But the other part is that there's lots of people of the engineers who really believe in open source, and they are really happy that Sun is opening up. They're on the tech meeting where we were, there was people who said that it's really for true, so no, it's really going to happen. And they are seeing us as an enabler for things going forward. That's really nice. I mean, lots of enthusiastic people. That's the place to be.
So, you know, in terms of you guys actually have your own projects sort of independent of the main MySQL tree going forward. You know, you're working on Maria and the new storage engine. Brian, you recently announced Drizzle, sort of radical rethinking, really forking MySQL. You know, what kind of support do you have inside Sun for those projects?
My boss's response to Drizzle was, when I first explained to him a couple of months ago, and I said, this is what I'm doing, he paused for a second and he goes, well, so what it is, it's a different, you're going after an entirely different market area and an entirely different niche within the ecosystem. And he got that immediately. And as I started telling that same story within the labs organization and to the different CTOs and chief technologists, people got that immediately. And then it wasn't so much a, hey, let's go and, you know, there's a certain direction that the MySQL code base has been heading in for quite some time now with 5.0 and 5.1. And those features have a very, there's a place and a time for those features in one domain, or in actually many domains. But there's a domain that
specifically features added to support enterprise.
Enterprise. What do we see? Like Enterprise 2.0 replacements for places where they don't need actually an Oracle, or they need something that they're designing a new application around, where they'll need something like partitioning, or they'll need some other piece that makes up 5.0, 5.1. But there is a core set of environments where none of those features are valuable, and all they do is they extend the product and make it actually vulnerable to bugs that really don't need to be there in the first place. Part of what actually made me start on Drizzle was a conversation I was having with Rackspace CTO. There's a project I had started formulating a number of months ago, which is called Pandora's DB, and it is kind of basically taking a Unix concept of building a cloud database, but not trying to like write everything from scratch, but instead taking out components that exist in open source to build up a database. So for instance, the optimizer you would see is actually a workman system called Gearman. So Gearman is the piece that's handling that. I needed a component for being able to...
Brad Fitzpatrick.
Yep,
right,
yeah, another Danga thing from Brad.
Yeah, Brad is sort of one of the, he's sort of sung these days, but kind of like really one of the amazing forces in the modern open source movement. Just released more pieces of software that keep cropping up.
Yeah, I saw his curl on Google Apps Engine, which you know, suddenly moves Google Apps Engine even further down for people to use. But I needed a lot of those components, and in some cases my goal is to write them. In the case of Drizzle, I needed that. We had a code base which we could start with and move that direction. We've been working now for a number of months of improving on Gearman. We now have a C version of the server and client worker pieces now that are also written in C. You know, months ago when I knew I needed a caching component to this, so we wrote libmemcached, which is a C library of memcached. There are pieces though that we also know that haven't been written yet. There's what I've been calling a proximity database. There's me and Josh Burkus, who's one of the heads of the Postgres development team, have talked about this a bunch, but the need for something which is good for storing location. If you were doing GIS today, you probably are using Postgres. But if you're trying just to store, for instance, proximity data, which is something very different, there's nothing out there that we can store.
Proximity data obviously is going to become much more important when our phone is a platform. And hey, I'm sitting next to you two guys, and you know, some application might want to know that.
Right, and it's not a case of a graph or graph where we know where things link off of. It's not a case of a range where a set of objects in a row. It's about actually knowing where something is physically present at any given time and knowing what is around that location and seeing how that moves temporally. And that type is a new form of data store that I'm personally hoping not to have to write. I'm hoping that the open source community comes out with, because it's obvious when we see anything from Second Life to being created to just real world applications we see done with the iPhone today. There's a need for a piece of software there today that has not been written.
Yeah. So, go on.
Yeah, the nice thing with the Sun, especially for me and Brian, is that Sun has given us more free hands to do what we want to do. And me, I need to finish what I believe is one of the most critical pieces for MySQL just now, and that's the engine I'm working on.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Mark Shuttleworth talked last night about Firefox as a model for sort of open source architecture today, and that's something I've talked a lot about, what I've called the architecture of participation. And MySQL had this real breakthrough, I think, with the pluggable storage engine architecture. And you're actually trying to take it even further here with the idea of let's strip the database down into a component. In a system that's architected of a set of components. It's that old original Unix philosophy, which I think is so close to the heart of open source, and everybody working needs to remember that. Do less, and then create extensibility mechanisms. Don't build big monolithic pieces of software. And we see, the creeping, monolithic approach that kind of comes in as projects get older. And you guys are, in some sense, kind of going back saying, no, we're figuring out how to do pieces that work together.
I mean, all new features. One of the key early on pieces I made with Drizzle is I decided that first thing is that it's going to be a microkernel. We're going to have a lot less features internally. Any kind of new feature is going to have to come through some form of an interface. In fact, if you want to add an interface for all the code for the interface, you have to reduce the main server by at least that amount of code in itself. So the idea is make it smaller, push it smaller, and actually push things more out towards the edge and less towards the center.
Hey, I was thinking we should open this to Q&A from the audience. So if you guys want to queue up microphones, feel free if you have questions for Brian or Monty. And, we can do that. So kind of meanwhile, I guess I wanted to do something, it's a little bit like that show Inside the Actor Studio where I just ask for reactions. So quickly, what do you think about Google?
So what do I think about Google? I'm happy that they are making more of their data exportable. I think that is good. When I look at Google's apps engine, I have this, in the back of my head, I'm kind of wondering if they're turning the entire world into their own favorite 20% project by getting everybody to put their apps there. So I think that's kind of an extension of that philosophy.
Monty?
I'm really happy with Google that they're participating in open source. I'm just very little like you that after some time there will be nothing else than Google and we need alternatives.
Okay, how about Amazon? Any reactions to Amazon as a company in today's market?
I think Amazon's an interesting position because they have always been a fairly secretive company, and they've suddenly been pushed out into the, out based on their own innovation. I mean, nobody even had really thought about Amazon. When I went and started first talking about EC2 and S3, and I had talked to at the time the VP of engineering at Google, and I was at his house and I was going through some notes, and he goes, "What's this Amazon stuff?" And it was interesting how, at the very beginning of that, how little anybody had ever thought of Amazon at all in that marketplace. And now it's really obvious that they're both the innovators and the leaders in that area of innovation.
Just amazing what they're doing.
Yeah. How about Microsoft? What do you guys think about Microsoft in today's market?
I see less and less of Microsoft, which I think is a good thing.
At this point, they're irrelevant.
So, I'm sorry for any people from Microsoft in the audience. I hope that you are going to prove these guys wrong, because it's great to have lots of vibrant competition. But it's just interesting sort of zeitgeist. How about Apple? What do you guys think about Apple?
I'm more afraid for Apple than Microsoft. They are just too locked in.
It's Yeah, it's kind of the I really want a new iPhone, and at the same token, I'm really hoping Google gets Android out fast enough so that it works well enough that I can use it. But I got to say, the iPhone, looks pretty damn good.
Why can't open source do anything as insanely great as the iPhone?
Hey, well, that's a good question. Why can't open source do anything as insanely great as the iPhone? Well, I'm hoping, there's a lot of stirrings of activity. We see, Firefox for mobile. We do see, Android. We do see Moblin. We do see OpenMoko. And by the way, OpenMoko, just something that really brings home the power of open source is that the first really interesting OpenMoko device is not a phone. It's the Dash, internet-connected GPS. And that shows how powerful it is when you put source out. Somebody can do something you don't expect. Who would have thought the first, popular consumer device would be an in-car GPS coming out of that project? Open source made that possible. Back there, can you say your name? I can't see you in the
Michael Tiemann.
Oh, Michael. Hey, great. You're totally in shadow with your hat. And,
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So obviously in my day job at Red Hat, we have a little bit of experience of acquiring open source companies and seeing what does and doesn't work. And my question for you guys is, now that you're sort of 6 months in, it's a two-part question. One is, what are the cool things that you think MySQL will be able to do, on the Sun field, and what are the cool things that Sun can do on the MySQL field that we might be talking about in a year? That's sort of part one. And part two is, do you see this combination of DNA being more important on things that are happening inside the Sun shell, or more important for the outside world?
So the thing that became very apparent within like the first week of the acquisition was the concept of how MySQL engineers expect companies to work. And behavior-wise, this is a lot of what I call having good table manners and dealing with open source projects. And what the Sun thought is how developers should work with other open source projects were very, very different. And so from that, you could have seen a huge clash of cultures. But in our case, it actually has turned out that our pushing of this is what our DNA believes and how companies should behave with other open source projects and how IP rights should work and how you should encourage developers has actually created a set of steps of revolution inside of Sun where, a few days ago I got to see looking at the first draft of, how Sun is going to start allowing employees to contribute to open source projects. And, one of the biggest belligerents we have internally is the head of the Linux Australia, Stuart Smith. And he was the first one to respond with, which was amazement of how good it looked. And it's been amazing to see how Sun has actually been, our DNA, which is very small. I mean, we're 300-400 people compared to a 30,000 some odd person company, and how fast our DNA has been pushing in that direction to have Sun rethink about how it actually works with open source.
Because you got a big cheerleader up at the top, right?
Yeah, that does actually help. But there's a lot of cheerleaders nowadays. Yeah. But yes.
And from the other point of view, MySQL has been management-driven and not developer-driven for the last 4 years. And Sun is getting us back to our roots. They are allowing us to participate more with the community. The one thing I think that we have totally failed in MySQL is involved the community during the last 3 years. If you submit the patch to us, we'll accept it and it will be in the product within 3 years. That's ridiculous. And Sun is going to ensure that that will change. And that's a really good thing.
So, quick question for you, Monty. You recently, you and David have made some donations to the Software Freedom Law Center and Cambia, which is the open source patent initiative in Australia. So you've kind of become, as a result of this, sort of starting to become a philanthropist of open causes. Can you talk a little bit about your thinking there and what you're trying to support and encourage?
I'm trying to be a good example, and I think that you should follow me up with my donations. The thing is that you need to show support for a thing what you believe with Patent Lens. They were in desperate need of money to survive the next few months. And David was able to help, and that feels really good.
All right.
Hi, thank you. As you're going through asking about the various companies, I have a question in regards to Adobe. they are making it possible for client-based MySQL with their Air application. How do you feel about the expansion of MySQL Lite and Air through the Adobe platform and the ability to synchronize databases in client-server environments? Are you think it's great that MySQL has a new place to grow?
Generally, I'm pretty happy whenever I see any new driver at all that exists. So, you know, there was a set of slides that David used to travel around with that literally got too big because there were so many drivers and so many projects that we do that, you know, it just got too big. So whenever anybody says, hey, we added another driver, I always think that that's pretty awesome.
Can I follow that up with a very general question? How do you feel about Adobe's open source openness?
Open source. I'll take that one. I think Adobe, you know, is one of the last few great proprietary software companies, and they flirt with, you know, with openness. They were thinking at one point, for example, of open sourcing Flash, and that's when I went on the Macromedia board. Actually, it was Macromedia pre-Adobe, and they kind of just, you know, went up to it and kind of sniffed around and kind of backed down. But, you know, again, like every company, they're deeply aware of and influenced by the open culture, and they know they need to become more open. You know, and I think through more interaction, more interoperability with open technologies, we'll get there. And more competition from open technologies. So we should probably wrap up because we're out of time. Thank you very much.